Hey, greetings, everyone. Lieutenant Colonel Alan West here, the Executive Director of the American Constitutional Rights Union and ACRU Action Fund. And welcome to another episode of Live Free TV, brought to you by the American Constitutional Rights Union. You know, one of the things that we learned at the United States Army Command and General Staff College during our strategic studies portion was the DIME theory. That is called the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic theory. Those are the four elements of national power. And I think that right now we're getting a pretty good lesson of how we could leverage the E portion, that economic aspect of our national power, to get things right balanced. I don't see how anyone could debate the issue that, these trade imbalances, these trade deficits that we have to be corrected if we're going to financially right the ship that's called the United States of America. We cannot continue to be $36 trillion in debt. We cannot continue to have this gross amount of deficit spending. We cannot continue to send more money out of this country, and especially money out of this country that goes to benefit some of our geopolitical foes. And even those people that are friends and allies, we need to make sure that we have that level playing field, that there is free trade, but also it is fair trade. But one of the things I love about history and technology is you can always go back and find hypocrisy. Let's take a look at this clip, and I'm sure some of you may have seen it, from Nancy Pelosi.
How much more repression, how big a trade deficit and loss of jobs for the American worker, and how much more dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, I will not endorse the status quo. As I mentioned, it's about jobs, proliferation, and human rights. And there are those who say we shouldn't link human rights and trade and proliferation and trade. I disagree. But if we just want to take up this issue on the basis of economics alone, indeed, China should not receive most favored nation status for several reasons that I'd like to go into now. I'd like to call the attention of our colleagues to this chart on the status quo that the business community is asking each and every one of you each and every one of us to endorse today.
Wow. What a slap in the face. Because this was 1996, Nancy Pelosi speaking in the well of the United States House of Representatives as they were debating to provide China with most favored trade nation status. See, the interesting thing I want you to understand in looking at that chart and understand where we are today, 29 years later. See, we defeated the Soviet Union economically, not militarily. There wasn't a shooting war in the Cold War, but Ronald Reagan did say we win, they lose. And what he understood was that we can leverage the strength of the American economy. If we get things right with the American economy, we get to producing and manufacturing, we lower our tax rates, we can take on the Soviet Union. And we did. And they collapsed. But see, China recognized that. And China understood that we cannot get into a economic war with the United States of America or with the West. And so what China did was finagle its way into the WTO, the World Trade Organization. They ended up getting most favored trade nation status with us. And we became addicted to cheap Chinese goods because for whatever reason, we stopped thinking about our own production, our own manufacturing, our own economic sovereignty. And I think that's what Donald Trump is trying to restore, not just our physical border sovereignty, our national sovereignty, but our economic sovereignty as well. When you look at that number that Nancy Pelosi put up on that placard, it said $34 billion of trade deficit. Now we're in the hundreds of billions of dollars in a trade deficit with our number one geopolitical foe. And I want you to understand something, that trade deficit, what it converts into is that money that China can use to send to Russia, to back their efforts in Ukraine, that they're using to build up their maritime force, that they're using to proliferate their one belt, one road global hegemonic strategy. So in a way, we're fueling our own demise. So what you see happening, and yeah, there's going to be a little pain with it, but aren't Americans resilient enough that we can stand and say, we want to see the defeat of the Chinese communists? You know, those people that have been, stealing our intellectual property, the Chinese communists that have been enforcing technological transfers of information. The Chinese communists that unleashed the biological weapon known as the Wuhan virus against the world, definitely us in the United States of America, killing millions, who have unleashed a chemical attack by way of this substance called fentanyl, which is, pretty much so, manufactured there in China, and they send it over to the transnational narco-criminal terrorists known as the cartels, and they bring it into the country. In 4 years of the Biden administration, over 250,000 Americans, 250,000 Americans, dead because of fentanyl. And of course, we have them poisoning the minds of our young people in our culture by way of TikTok and other platforms, telecommunications platforms that they have brought in by the way of ZTE and Huawei. Tens of thousands, single military age male Chinese who have infiltrated to this country across an open border. What do you think they're here for? Not to mention what is happening every day with them buying up land and property and farms, to include land here in Texas, very close to a military facility where we train our next generation fighter pilots. All of that is happening. That's the return on investment of allowing China to come into the WTO and giving them the most favored trade nation status. So I am not for tariffs. I mean, tariffs can have a very debilitating effect. As a matter of fact, a man that I highly respect, one of the great American economists, he even says so. Roll this clip.
It's painful to see what a ruinous decision from back in the 1920s being repeated. Now, insofar as he's using these tariffs to get very strategic things settled, and that he is satisfied with that. But if you set off a worldwide trade war, that has a devastating history. Everybody loses because everybody follows suit, and all that happens is that you get a great reduction in international trade.
See, I don't think the end result is an international trade war. I think the result will be an economic isolation of communist China. And we are already seeing some nations coming to the table and say, hey, look, let's negotiate this thing. Let's get ourselves to a very free and fair trade system between your country and ours, maybe 0-0. We will open up our markets just the same as you are opening up your markets. And most people want to be in the American economic markets. That's to their benefit. So I think, once again, what we have to understand is that we cannot continue to operate in election cycles against people that operate in 25, 50-year cycles. That clip that you saw from Nancy Pelosi was 1996. And look at where we are 29 years later. All of those things that she talked about there has come to fruition. And we've got to bring back our production manufacturing. It is absolutely insidious that we have our pharmaceuticals that come out of China, that we have our medical personal protection equipment that come out of China. And we saw that during the Wuhan virus crisis. So we need to right balance this. And I think that's what President Trump is after. And again, when you think about the European Union, I mean, let's be honest, the European Union was established as a trading bloc so that they could make themselves more competitive with the United States of America. And I think that they're worried about their credibility and their validity if all of a sudden they have to kowtow to the world's biggest economic market, which is the United States of America. Let's hear from the president himself.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry said that the market has spoken when asked about the tariffs. What do you make of that?
The market has spoken when they look at the fact that we have $1 billion trade deficit. When you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country. But with China, it's $1 trillion. And we have to solve our trade deficit with China. We have $1 trillion trade deficit with China. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year we lose with China. And unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal. Now, I'm willing to deal with China, but they have to solve their surplus. We have a tremendous deficit problem with China. They have a surplus of at least $1 trillion a year. I think it's like $1.1 trillion. And I want that solved. And no other president's taken it on. I had to take it on the last time, and then we had a rigged election. No other president's taken it on. And so China is, they say the market's spoken. China is right now taking a big hit because everyone knows we're right. They have to pay tariffs because otherwise we have a surplus and they have a surplus with us that is not sustainable.
See, what Ronald Reagan did was used our military escalation of our combat power to run the Soviet Union's economy into the ground. They couldn't keep up. Another thing what Donald Trump is doing is saying that our economy, our markets are strong enough to withstand this. Unfortunately, we have people in the markets that operate in the 24 to 48, maybe a 72-hour cycle. You cannot defeat our number one geopolitical foe like a China with a 24 to 48-hour mindset. You have to have the long-term mindset. You have to have the strategic mindset. And again, think about this. Donald Trump came into office, the 20th of January? And here we are, the early part of April. Where's our resilience as a nation, especially economically? Because if we don't take China on in this manner, in this fashion economically, eventually, and the Chinese have said this, eventually, we may have to take them on militarily. And we know that this trade imbalance that they have, as I stated previously, they're using it to build up their maritime forces. They're using it to build up their dominance across the world. I mean, we built the Panama Canal. Chinese contractors were operating it. That's upside down. And when you talk about the tariffs, I mean, Donald Trump had tariffs in his first administration. And oh, by the way, for those that don't understand, President Biden kept a lot of those tariffs in place during his administration. So enough with this hypocrisy, especially the hypocrisy coming from, this clown. Roll the clip.
The economy is crashing right now. It's crashing. And the President of the United States, he is golfing. He's hitting balls. I'm taking calls from constituents and people all over the country whose 401ks are now 201ks. The cost of your groceries is going way up. Go to Target, go to Walmart, go to Home Depot. Almost everything that you're going to put in your shopping cart was made overseas, and the cost of it is going way up. The guy is golfing right now as you're going to be paying more. Retirement security, gone. All of that is gone. This guy doesn't care. It's not about America first, it's about Trump first. So, Mr. President, get your ass off the golf course and go fix this.
First and foremost, Representative Swalwell, your ass was laid up with a Chinese communist spy by the name of Fang Fang. So I don't think you have any moral high ground here. And if you want to talk about golfing, I recall, President Barack Obama went golfing after an American had been beheaded by ISIS, that terrorist group that he called the Junior Varsity that he kind of created because he left a vacuum over in Iraq. And when you are talking about this whole thing about prices going up, where were you when inflation went from 1.4% as President Trump left the office to, if I'm correct, 9.1% under the Biden administration? Didn't hear you talk about inflation. Didn't hear you talk about rising gas prices. And I think that this selective, unrighteous indignation, American people have had enough of it. See, we've got to be focused on the long ball. That's what we're focused on here at the American Constitutional Rights Union. Tariffs are a tool, and especially a tool that can be used with one of the strongest economies, the strongest economy in the world, against our number one geopolitical foe. It's important for us to bring more of our nations across the world into our circle and isolate the Chinese communists. Because if we don't do this now, then when will we do it? If we don't do it now, economically, will we have to do it militarily? So let's show some resilience. Kind of like men of my father's generation who made it through the Depression and then took on the powers of Nazi Germany, imperialist Japan, fascist Italy, and brought about victory, hard-fought victory in 4 years. Let's get back to being that kind of America. Let's get back to being the kind of America that our founding fathers intended us to be when they stood on a battlefield in Lexington 250 years ago and when they established this great nation by way of Constitution, the longest running constitutional republic that the world has ever known. But as Alexander Fraser Tytler said, that cycle of democracies, it's about 200 years. I don't want to see our shelf life all of a sudden come to fruition. Now's the time to stand. Now's the time to show courage. Now's the time to show resolve and resiliency. And let's defeat communist Chinese, just the same as Ronald Reagan defeated the evil empire of the Soviet Union. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Live Free TV, brought to you by the American Constitutional Rights Union. And until next time, steadfast and loyal.